a lot of people have asked the question, are demons real? Are negative entities part of what's going on around us? Are they figments of our imagination? And so I'm going to share a bit from my personal experience, what I've learned from, direct experience, as well as a little bit of what I came across later in content from Rudolf Steiner, Anthroposophy, and other mystics. So I'm going to start off by saying yes, these energies or forces are real, and yet they aren't made of material things the way that we are or animals are. These energies or forces, they live in another dimension that is very close to our dimension. And for some sensitive people who are sensitive to goings on in other dimensions, these forces are able to be felt, experienced, or maybe even seen through dreams, visions, meditations, or just through their third eye. And so there's a lot that could be said about this topic. I'm going to just kind of share some of the basics. And if anybody has any more experience or knowledge that they want to drop in the comments, that would be great. So it can be kind of a serious topic, especially if you've been somebody who has experienced some challenging things when it comes to dark forces. But I assure you that there's nothing to be afraid of. These kind of forces really only can affect us through fear. And so if we are committed to facing our primal fears and feeling our feelings and letting those waves wash over us without attaching to them or letting them stick, then there's really nothing to be afraid of. And just a little bit of a personal note, I grew up in evangelical Christianity, where there's a lot of fear in religion when it comes to this topic, because people have sometimes had experiences that were really dark and weren't resourced. They didn't have knowledge, they didn't have mentors, they didn't have elders that really understood the structure of other dimensions that are close to Earth and how to work with that. And despite the fact that even Jesus Christ had no fear of demons and, had conversations with, Satan or the devil, like, almost like a banter, despite the fact that, that Christ figure had no fear. A lot of the followers of Christianity are very much plagued with fears that I don't think Jesus Christ really was hoping his followers would have or spread. But when I was growing up in that religion, that's what I was exposed to from quite an early age. And that has been a big part of my own journey, my own healing, to shed these layers of existential and primal fears when it has come to other dimensions, other realms that aren't so pretty. So that's kind of my preamble. So I first started experiencing the presences of what I would call negative energies or negative entities when I was 3. I would wake up from nightmares and still be able to see the beings in my room. I've shared in some other videos, I'd sometimes wet the bed because I was too afraid to even leave my bed to go to the bathroom because these guys were in the way. My own mother was terrified of the idea of demons, and so I couldn't really find solace with any kind of adult figure in my life, or I just wasn't going to be believed. So I kind of dealt with these things on my own. When I got a little bit older, to like age 7 or 8, I was no longer having encounters like this. As we get a little bit older and out of our like toddler years, we become more grounded into the earth reality. We're less in the spirit world. But I could still feel presences like in old houses or around certain people that were very chilling. And I was young and I was not resourced on how to handle or process them. And I kind of would go into like a frozen fear mode. And I actually spent many years, like 7, 8, 9, 10, just kind of like in anticipation for the next time I would kind of run into one of these energies. And what it would feel like for me as a highly sensitive kid would be, everything was fine, the day was going good, go into some old house, maybe a relative or someplace, and the same sensation would just suddenly come over me in a certain room that I had when I was 3, when I could actually see those beings. And so it was actually a little bit hard when I was like 7, 8, or 9, because I couldn't even see them, so I didn't even have my bearings. It was kind of like I was face to face with the unknown, and then people were around me who couldn't even sense these things. So there was like a real isolation and an aloneness that I lived a lot of my childhood in because of being able to sense things like this. Then it all kind of got blocked out, and it was so traumatic that I just really couldn't remember any of this when I was older, thank goodness. And then after my near-death experience and some ayahuasca ceremonies between 2018 and 2020, all these memories came back to me, and I could start to sense these things all over again. So it was really time for me to start facing some of these memories, start facing some of these forces when I was now an adult and could be more resourced. When I had teachers, when I had teachings to be able to start to powerfully, compared to when I was younger, start to step into facing these things. So there are layers of reality and dimensions outside of our material plane. You might have heard the term, 3D, third dimensional world, material world. And that's what we're living in, You can feel things, they're solid, they're experienced as solid, And most people only are aware of the 3D material world and make decisions based on that, that's all there is. If you're on a spiritual path, you're a little bit more open to that there's more, either through direct experience or just through a deep inner knowing. And so we have around us kind of like another layer that some people can see sometimes, and that's the ether realm, the ethereal realm, whatever. And this is often where so-called ghosts or energies of people who have passed, and that part of them hasn't fully crossed over. That part of them is still kind of like detached from their soul and stuck in the material world. That's kind of like where they hang out. And they can be attached to certain places, certain houses, just because they haven't quite let go of their attachment to the physical world. They might have like an unresolved trauma or something like that. In the ethereal world, it's a little bit wispy. If you would imagine, kind of like you can see figures of people, parts of people, but it's more see-through. Like one time I could see the ethereal body of a cat that was living with me. So the cat was sleeping on the bed, the physical material cat, but the ethereal body of the cat was awake, and it was looking up at the corner of the room where there was a dark energy that I could feel and sense. And the ethereal body of the cat was hissing at this presence, which woke me up and alerted me to what was there. So this ethereal realm is really close to us, and you probably sense it often, like through kind of like your sixth sense. It's not always really clear what's going on there, but you can kind of feel like really good things or maybe scary things, or you can sometimes feel things from there, whether you're sensitive or not. And then we've got kind of a little bit out from there, the astral realm. And I say out from there, but like what's without is also within. So we have these layers inside of ourselves that involve the ethereal and the astral, and also outside of ourselves. So we're kind of like a singularity. It's everywhere, but a little bit more removed from our awareness, I would say, is the astral realm, which has a lower or fourth dimensional realm, and kind of like a neutral and then an upper. And beyond that, there are higher dimensions that are very much non-dual, very removed from the troubles of this material world. And so when we think about negative entities, demons, dark forces, they're mostly stuck in that lower astral realm, which is also called sometimes the eighth sphere. It can be called the moon realm. It's kind of like a catch-all space for chaos in the spiritual realm. And this place houses forces that affect humanity. And these forces can come from all different places. There can be energies or forces from deceased humans that failed initiations, that weren't able to successfully go through a corrective process after dying, that maybe were too resistant to let the light of God shine on the dark parts of themselves so that they could clean and raise and go to the higher dimensions, because we all have free will. And if they were unable to pass through because they were unable to look at themselves, they got stuck somewhere. So they weren't able to reincarnate into a human body, and they weren't able to pass. And one of the reasons that sometimes they're not able to reincarnate into a human body is because the vibration and the light of Earth, as dark as it seems right now, it's actually raising. It's actually getting brighter and clearer and more purified. And the darkness that we see through the wars and the attacks and all the stuff around us that seems so terrible and dark is actually a purging. It's actually a cleaning. Okay, so Earth is actually going through becoming more purged and more light. So when it's time for one of these deceased people to reincarnate, Earth is actually too light for them to come back to. The bodies, the children that are being born now, are more pure, and so they're not an energetic match to kind of reincarnate and jump into one of those kids' bodies. So they are unwilling to go towards the light and see the truth of what they are. And then there's also not a spot here on Earth. So they're kind of stuck in this eighth sphere, in this lower astral zone. Also, what is housed in that eighth sphere, in that lower astral zone, are our thought forms. And they could be thought forms even from previous lives, where we've had really ongoing patterns of intense hatred towards ourselves or other people. Ongoing jealousy, ongoing guilt that we just really committed ourselves. And those thought forms actually become forces that have to exist somewhere. And so this place, for the beings that are there, they're very unconscious of anywhere outside of the fourth dimension, outside of the astral realm. They're very much unable to perceive what's higher. They don't even believe there's anything higher than the astral realm for the most part. And if they're able to perceive Earth, then it's from a very distorted point of view. They're not able to really understand light and love and compassion that does exist here in this realm in growing amounts. And so their existence in that astral realm is very survival based. And there are wars and conflicts and expressions of these really low vibrating, anger and jealousy and destruction. And it's just all kind of playing out. And some people experience visits to this astral realm to kind of remote view and see what's going on there. Sometimes we even can find parts of ourselves that have gotten stuck there, and that can happen in spontaneous dreams. There are dreams that I've had where I found myself in that fourth dimensional realm and really couldn't find my way out while I was there. And at the time it was quite frightening because I was kind of discombobulated. But I was forced to face and see firsthand some of the fears that I had really repressed into my subconscious. But I will say that when you're in that realm, you're really not able to see much outside of it. So you can imagine that these kind of energies coming, from deceased people that couldn't pass their initiations, our thought forms that we've created, and even like there are ancient forces that have gotten stuck there from a long, long time ago, and they're kind of like in this holding space. They still affect us on Earth based on our personal history of trauma. So a negative energy can't just like suddenly and out of the blue come and like possess you or torment you or do anything unless you either like through black magic or ritualistic you want them to, which isn't people who are watching this video. But we can be affected by and influenced by them in the areas where we have unhealed trauma. We can be influenced by them in the areas where we have unhealed trauma. That's where we're vulnerable. If there is a part of us that's unhealed and there are memories or feelings that we're refusing to face or process, then that aspect is going to attract, because like attracts like, it's going to attract the influence and the force from the astral realm towards us. And then there's just more of that thing. And so it sounds like, oh, I don't want to attract a negative energy or a negative entity. Because that would be unpleasant. If I'm already feeling feelings of fear or anxiety, I don't want to attract more. But the truth is, like attracts like. And so the nice thing about this, because not everything is black and white, is that these forces, if you are on a true spiritual path, these forces can be initiating factors or forces for you to get to your next level. And so if you're already someone who's got underlying fear, but you're not like absorbed in it fully, and then a force from the astral realm that also has the same vibration of primal fear starts to be around you, instead of getting frightened and being, oh, I'm going to run for an energy healing or whatever, it's actually a potential gift because it's magnifying and exposing something that's already there with you that isn't helpful and that maybe you haven't noticed. And so it's doing you a favor by pointing out what needs to be looked at, what needs to be healed. And so right now on Earth, as we all well know, there's a lot of upheaval and a lot of darkness and a lot of death. And because we're going through this great shift, a lot of people are finding that they're feeling really big feelings or experiencing maybe forces of heaviness or forces of fear beyond what they're used to feeling. And these are representing unhealed parts of us that are getting magnified by sometimes these forces that are in our energy fields, so that we can be like, whoa, I've got that going on. I need to address that. Or it's just going to keep multiplying and multiplying and keep attracting others, maybe even other human beings that are vibrating the same way. And so in the astral realm, there is a bit of a squeeze going on, as you can see. And as time passes on this earth and more children are born that have a higher vibration, there's going to be less and less of a place for these kind of forces to go. There's going to be less matches going on. Everybody who's doing their spiritual work of purification and looking at themselves and changing what needs to be changed, then these forces aren't going to be a match. And so our greatest protection, not that these things can hurt us, they can frighten us, but our greatest protection is doing our work, doing our shadow work, doing our purification, doing our self-reflection, looking at ourselves and feeling what needs to be felt and letting go of attachments that are no longer helpful to us. Some people are curious about what to do if they are especially sensitive and they are suddenly bombarded with the presence of what seems to be a being from the astral world, if they're seeing it in their third eye, if it's showing up in a dream. And that can be really frightening, especially if it happens suddenly and out of the blue. I know from personal experience. And so one thing that I was shown to do from spirit guides in a dream, and then the dream reoccurred a few times so that I could practice. I was in my house the first time I had the dream. I got a knock on the door, and when I opened the door in the dream, there was like a very disgusting looking, demonic looking monster. And I was first like definitely shocked. And then I was shown by the spirit guide to just notice that it was emanating its own fear. It was emanating its own fear. And so my response wasn't to try and destroy it or kill it or harm it. It was already not in a good place. My response was to be focusing on my heart center, envisioning like a beautiful heart center, a glowing heart center, feeling it first in myself, feeling that warmth, that light, that softness, that compassion, and then allowing that field to grow outside of me in all directions, and sharing my frequency with this being that had knocked on the door and felt very scary to look at. And so that was giving this being the option, hey, this is an option. You don't need to be in fear. You knocked on my door, so I've answered the door, and this is who I am, and this is what I embody, and this is what I represent. I'm not going to force you to be like me. I'm not going to try and destroy you, but I am going to share my frequency with you as an option, because it looks like you're looking for something. And so I would practice. I would have the same dream over and over and practice sharing that frequency from my heart that I've described. But it can't go just from you to the other being. It has to first be felt and embodied in yourself. You have to actually really become that heart-centered frequency before you can beam it out anywhere else. And then, that being always would turn around and go, because there was too much exposure. They weren't comfortable with that level of light. And then I was fine to go on my way. And so if you're somebody who has been visited by dark forces and found yourself very unresourced, I would encourage you to focus on that Christ light in your heart that was embodied by Jesus the Christ, but it's a frequency really that's available to anybody who wants to carry it. And that would be the number one way of showing up. And then secondary to that, after your encounter is over and you're kind of, integrating, become very curious about what aspect of your life, what vulnerability you have that would have attracted that type of a being to you in the first place. And then that's your next work. That's something to look at. And for me, it's always been primal fear. Probably based on past lives and based on those experiences I had in my room when I was 3. And so the best thing for that is to face it over and over and over. And as time has passed, sometimes the primal fear still comes, but it has less of an effect because so many times now I've had this practice of opening my heart center and flooding myself with self-compassion and light and changing my vibration to that. And then the primal fear just kind of like fizzles out or passes by more quickly. And it's just practice, practice, practice. So if that's you, get practicing. And another reason why it's important to be practicing this, even if you're not seeing dark forces or coming face to face with them, we still feel these things, especially the people around us who are really saturated and lost with the goings on that's happening on this planet, of the violence and the war and all that kind of thing. Don't get sunk down into that stuff, because something else that's important to know is that people who participate in those things are very unconscious, they're very frightened, and they're very traumatized and very disconnected from source. And so they're very good energetic matches to beings in the lower astral world, to beings in the 8th sphere. And so the more a person is open to those types of beings in the 8th sphere by vibrating in a violent, fearful way, the more they're going to be controlled by and visited by those beings. And that makes them become like a portal from the astral world into the physical world for these kind of forces. So you can see what's going on. The more that violence and war and fear and strife is perpetuated here on the physical plane, the more invitation it is, as above, so below, to invite these kind of forces to play themselves out. And so we're in this for the long haul. We don't know what else is going to happen. We've been through a lot of fear on the planet through the pandemic. There's a lot going on now. There's a lot being shown, even graphic images that we weren't seeing such graphic images, 5-10 years ago, as we're seeing now. That's waking up more primal fear in people and opening more portals from the astral world. And so there's a bifurcation that's going on. Those who are quite spiritually sensitive can probably see it. People who are following the way of evolution, spiritual evolution, organic spiritual evolution, facing their fears, looking at what needs to be looked at, leaving behind attachments. People who are willing to go on that path and are unafraid of what happens, they're just going to keep walking, they're doing that thing. And then people who are being given into very deep primal fears, there's really not going to be a huge neutral ground at a certain point. And so to avoid attracting forces from the lower astral world, what do? We keep doing our work. We don't give in to fear. We don't focus on things that are going to bring up more fear in us. We acknowledge that it's going on around us, but we focus on other things, and we become more of a lighthouse. And just know that, these things have been going on for a long time. We're in long cycles on Earth. We go back, really farther than we think. And so these are ancient forces that are playing themselves out. We were reincarnated many times. We've gone through, in our other incarnations, we've gone through really horrible things happening ourselves. We might have been perpetrators. We probably have had lifetimes of perpetrators of violence and war. And so as we're pointing the finger sometimes at other people, we've all contributed in some way. We're maybe not all engaging in outer conflict, but if we have inner conflict in ourselves, then we're also feeding into that conflict energy. And so doing our part right now by examining all of our inner conflict so that we're not contributing to this what's going on in this big conflict outside. And knowing that in other lives we've definitely been part of war, and this is part of our evolution. This is part of our evolution. This is nothing to feel guilty about. So, negative energies, negative entities are real. There's nothing to be afraid of. And if you ever feel yourself face to face or being bombarded by their frequency, go back to your heart center, change your frequency to be glowing and compassionate and sacred and clean, and emanating that to yourself first and then to the field around you. And then after, being curious about the nature of that energy, the nature of that force, and what part of you was vulnerable to it, and then what needs to be looked at and done on your part. And to know that it might come back and show up over and over. There's nothing wrong with that. That just means you're practicing, and being more and more aware of that vulnerable part that probably comes from like an early childhood trauma or a past life trauma, but it's not impossible to heal. And these demon possession things, that you see in Hollywood, that's very Hollywood. That's not really what usually goes on. I mean, it can, but that would be somebody who has experienced such high levels of trauma that their energy field, their protective shield is like totally broken. So that would be very, very rare and not something for most people to fear. Most people, even people that are good people or they're doing their work, we're all subject to these forces based on our vulnerabilities. And so just knowing that we're all in this together and we're all riding these waves is great. And yeah, they're because of these catastrophic violent events that are happening on Earth, just know that these are actually opening portals. It's true, they are opening portals to the eighth sphere and to the lower astral realm. That's real. But it doesn't have to be your reality. It doesn't have to be your reality. You're not opening those portals to yourself. We can be a witness to what other people's karma is playing out, what other people's decisions are resulting in. And yes, we're all connected and we're all in this together, but we don't have to be experiencing the same things. Know that you don't need to fear, and as serious of a topic as it feels like when you're in it, just bring a smile from your heart and know that nothing can hurt you. Things can only just frighten you. Even if your body dies or your body gets killed, you are still you. You are still your soul. Nothing can harm your soul. I would love to hear if anybody has any other pieces of knowledge or experience or things that have worked for them. Please feel free to drop them in the comments. And if you like this video, please like or comment. And thanks for watching.